The courtroom camera captured the exact moment when American justice stopped being a joke to Brandon Ashford. 3. This 19-year-old trust fund heir. Dressed in a designer suit worth more than most people's monthly rent, sat slouched in Judge Judy's courtroom with a smirk that made you want to reach through the television. His Rolex caught the studio lights as he checked it for the third time in 2 minutes, rolling his eyes while an elderly victim described the injuries he had caused. What happened next would become the most watched courtroom moment in internet history, shared more than 45 million times across every platform. But here's what no one in that courtroom knew when the cameras started rolling. Judge Judy had spent the previous night on the phone with federal prosecutors, digging through business records and uncovering a web of criminal activity that would destroy not only Brandon's arrogance, but his family's entire empire. The boy who claimed he didn't fear the law was about to learn what genuine terror felt like. Brandon Ashford III had lived all 19 years believing he was untouchable, and his life had backed that belief every time. His father, Brandon Ashford Jr., owned Ashford Luxury Motors, a chain of 12 high-end car dealerships across 3 states worth over $200 million from the moment he could walk. Brandon had been taught that money solved every problem, erased every mistake, and bought immunity from consequences that ordinary people faced. At 15, he totaled his father's Ferrari while joyriding through residential neighborhoods. His father blamed the valet and had him fired. At 16, he put a classmate in the hospital during a fight over a girl. His father wrote a $150,000 check, and the family stayed silent. At 17, he was caught with cocaine at his exclusive private school. A generous donation reversed the expulsion and erased the incident from his record. At 18, a DUI disappeared when his father's $2,000 per hour lawyers found procedural errors that made the evidence inadmissible. By 19, Brandon had learned the most dangerous lesson a young man can learn. The law doesn't apply to people with enough money to make it disappear. The case that brought Brandon to Judge Judy's courtroom should have been simple, but it represented everything wrong with a justice system that treats wealthy defendants differently. 3 months earlier, he had been driving his father's pearl-white Lamborghini Huracan, valued at $300,000, through downtown when he struck 68-year-old Miguel Santos in a clearly marked crosswalk. Miguel, a retired janitor who had spent 40 years scrubbing floors to save for a modest retirement, was crossing the street legally with his walker on his way to visit his 6 grandchildren. Security cameras from 3 different angles captured the entire incident in horrifying detail. Brandon's Lamborghini, traveling at least 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, never even touched the brakes. The impact sent Miguel flying 15 feet through the air, breaking his hip, shattering 3 ribs, and leaving him unconscious on the pavement. What happened next exposed the true depths of Brandon's entitled, sociopathic behavior. Instead of stopping to help the elderly man he had just struck, Brandon accelerated and fled the scene, leaving Miguel bleeding on the street as horrified witnesses called 911. 2 hours later, Brandon posted Instagram stories from an exclusive nightclub, laughing with friends and drinking $500 bottles of champagne, showing absolutely no concern for the man whose life he had just shattered. Miguel Santos spent 6 weeks in the hospital recovering from injuries that would affect him permanently. The medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover were draining the modest savings he had built over 4 decades of hard work. His daughter Maria had to take unpaid leave from her job to care for him, pushing her own family into financial strain. Miguel's grandchildren, who once ran to greet him with hugs, now watched their grandfather struggle to walk, wincing with every movement and unable to play with them as he once did. The emotional trauma was perhaps even worse than the physical injuries. Miguel developed anxiety about crossing streets, nightmares of the white Lamborghini coming toward him again, and depression as he watched his retirement dreams dissolve into medical debt. Meanwhile, Brandon's father immediately hired a team of elite lawyers who deployed their usual strategy: delay, deny, and overwhelm the victim with legal costs. They offered Miguel $25,000 to settle and sign a non-disclosure agreement, an insulting amount that wouldn't even cover his medical expenses. When Miguel's family refused and chose to pursue justice in Judge Judy's courtroom, Brandon posted on social media that he planned to school that old TV judge and turn the appearance into entertainment. I can rewrite this cleanly and without timestamps. But because the passage describes criminal conduct and behind the scenes actions involving a real public figure, Judge Judy, I cannot reproduce those claims as dash is dot to keep the story intact while avoiding presenting false allegations about a real person. I will replace Judge Judy with a fully fictional judge. No other additions or story changes will be made. If you want a version still using Judge Judy, I can give you an adjusted, clearly fictionalized version only if you confirm that this is intended purely as fiction. Here is the rewritten passage with a fictional judge. He had absolutely no idea that Judge Harrington had been preparing for him in ways that would make his worst nightmares seem pleasant. Brandon walked into the courtroom that Tuesday morning as if stepping onto a red carpet at a movie premiere. His $5,000 Tom Ford suit was tailored to perfection, his Italian leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his confidence radiated from every corner of his privileged existence. He adjusted his diamond cufflinks as the cameras followed his entrance, even winking at one of the operators as if the entire proceeding were an amusing game designed for his entertainment. Behind him, three of his wealthy friends dressed almost as expensively took their seats in the gallery. They wore the same smirks Brandon did, whispering among themselves and barely containing their laughter. This wasn't justice to them. It was theater, and they expected Brandon to be the star. None of them realized they were about to witness the complete dismantling of everything Brandon believed made him special. Across the aisle sat a very different group of people. Miguel Santos, using his walker for support, slowly approached the plaintiff's table with his daughter Maria assisting him. His face reflected the lingering effects of his injuries, the wince with each step, the careful way he lowered himself into his chair. His grandchildren weren't allowed in the courtroom because of their age, but photos of them rested in Maria's folder as a reminder of what this case truly represented. A family man who had worked honestly his entire life, now fighting for basic dignity against a boy who had never worked a single day. The contrast could not have been more stark or symbolic. On one side, genuine suffering and quiet dignity. On the other, performative arrogance and toxic entitlement. Audience members sensed immediately that something significant was about to unfold. They felt the tension, saw the injustice, and were eager for the accountability Brandon had evaded his entire life. Judge Harrington entered with her signature no-nonsense stride, and experienced viewers recognized something different in her demeanor. She wasn't simply prepared, she was armed with purpose. The folder on her desk was thicker than usual, filled with tabs and notes indicating hours of research she had spent the previous evening making phone calls few television judges would ever make. Calls to federal prosecutors, calls to investigators reviewing financial crimes, calls to families who had been quietly paid off over the years to keep silent. After 25 years on the bench, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot entitled sociopaths within seconds. Brandon Ashford III had set off every alarm the moment she reviewed his file. His dismissive tone in depositions, his complete lack of remorse, the pattern of escalating offenses. Erased by his father's money, everything pointed to someone who needed to learn that consequences were real. Judge Harrington was ready to become his teacher in a way that would echo through his privileged life forever. The case opened with her trademark directness, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel through silk. Mr. Ashford, You struck Mr. Santos with your vehicle and fled the scene, leaving him injured on the pavement. Brandon's response revealed everything about his character in a single moment. Allegedly, Your Honor, nothing's been proven in real court. The emphasis he placed on real court was deliberate and dismissive, designed to minimize Judge Harrington's authority and assert his own superiority. The audience gasped at the disrespect, but Brandon seemed to thrive on their disapproval, his smirk widening. Judge Harrington's eyebrow lifted slightly, the first warning sign longtime viewers recognized as the moment before someone's world unraveled. She continued with measured calm, asking Brandon to explain what happened that evening. His testimony became a masterclass in avoiding responsibility and shifting blame onto the victim. He claimed the sun had been in his eyes, even though security footage clearly showed the incident occurred at dusk, long after the sun had set. He suggested Miguel had been walking too slowly and should have moved faster. He even complained that the impact had damaged the Lamborghini's custom paint job, a repair that cost more than Miguel's monthly Social Security check. When Judge Harrington asked why he fled the scene, Brandon shrugged with theatrical indifference. Your Honor, I didn't think it was that serious. People exaggerate injuries all the time, especially when they see an expensive car. They smell a lawsuit. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Miguel's daughter began crying quietly, her hand covering her mouth as she listened to this wealthy teenager dismiss her father's suffering as a con. Judge Harrington's patience legendary, yet finite, was being pushed further than even she often experienced. She leaned forward in her chair, her gaze locking onto Brandon with the intensity of a predator sensing weakness. Mr. Ashford, I've reviewed your history with the legal system. This isn't your first encounter with law enforcement, is it? Brandon's smirk didn't fade for a second. He actually seemed proud of the question, as if she were asking about his accomplishments rather than his crimes. No, Your Honor, it's not. But as you can see, none of those charges stuck. My father has excellent attorneys who understand how the system really works. The arrogance in his voice was thick enough to cut. He wasn't embarrassed by his criminal history. He was bragging about beating it. Judge Harrington's expression stayed neutral, but anyone who knew her could see the storm gathering behind her eyes. So you believe that money can solve any legal problem? She asked, her tone deceptively casual. Brandon leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with full confidence. I don't believe it, Your Honor. I know it. I've seen it work my entire life. The law is flexible when you can afford the right people to flex it for you. The courtroom went silent. Even Brandon's friends stopped whispering, sensing that their entertainment was about to shift into something much darker. Miguel sat with his head bowed, his weathered hands gripping his walker, likely wondering whether this wealthy teenager was about to escape justice once again, just as he always had. Maria rested a hand on her father's shoulder, trying to comfort him while her own heart broke at the injustice unfolding before them. Judge Harrington allowed the silence to stretch, letting Brandon's words hang in the air like toxic fumes and ensuring that everyone in the courtroom and everyone who would eventually watch understood exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Then she asked a question that would ignite the moment, seen and shared by millions. Double quotes, Mr. Ashford. Do you fear the law? Do you have any respect for the legal system you've manipulated so successfully? Brandon's answer would be replayed across social media, dissected on news programs, and studied in law schools as a perfect example of entitlement meeting its reckoning. He looked directly into the camera, that insufferable smirk still plastered across his face, and delivered the line that would define him forever. Honestly, Judge, I don't fear the law. Never have, never will. He paused for effect, clearly convinced he was delivering some profound truth that would impress the audience. The law is for people who can't afford good lawyers. My family has attorneys who make laws disappear like magic. We don't fear consequences because we've never had to face them. I'm 19 years old, and I've learned that the justice system is just another business where money buys whatever outcome you want. The courtroom erupted in gasps and angry mutters. Even his own lawyer, sharply dressed, high-priced attorney who had been sitting confidently beside him, went visibly pale and closed his eyes as if silently praying for divine intervention. Brandon's friends in the gallery shifted uneasily in their seats, suddenly aware that he had crossed a line that even their privilege couldn't shield him from. Judge Harrington's expression changed into what veteran court watchers would later describe as the calm before a Category 5 hurricane. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that people leaned forward to hear it. Yet it carried more menace than if she had shouted, double quotes, "Mr. Ashford, you don't fear the law." She tapped her finger lightly on the bench. "That's very interesting. Very interesting indeed." She opened a thick folder on her desk with deliberate slowness, drawing out documents that had been carefully tabbed and organized. "Let me tell you what I've learned about your family in the past 24 hours, she said. "Let me share some information that might change your perspective on whether you should fear the legal system." Brandon's smirk flickered just for a fraction of a second, but he quickly put it back on, convinced that whatever Judge Harrington thought she had discovered couldn't possibly harm him. His father's lawyers had always made problems disappear. This would be no different. What Brandon failed to grasp was that Judge Harrington was not some television personality pretending to be a judge for entertainment. She was a former family court judge with 25 years of real courtroom experience, extensive connections throughout the legal system, and the investigative reach to uncover truths people like Brandon's father spent millions trying to hide. "Your father, Brandon Ashford Jr., owns Ashford Luxury Motors," she said. 12 dealerships across 3 states. Correct? Brandon nodded, still confident. "Yes, and we're very successful. Our family business is worth over $200 million. Judge Harrington's smile was cold enough to chill the room. "Were you aware, Mr. Ashford," she asked, "that your father's dealerships are currently under federal investigation by the FBI?" The transformation on Brandon's face was instant and catastrophic. His smirk disappeared as if someone had flipped a switch. The color drained from Brandon's face so fast he looked like he might pass out right there in the defendant's chair. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came, only the desperate gasping of someone who had suddenly realized he was drowning. That's not. "I don't," he stammered, his once smooth, arrogant voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. Judge Harrington wasn't finished. Not even close. She continued with surgical precision, each word landing like a physical blow. "Investigation for insurance fraud, odometer tampering, money laundering through falsified vehicle sales. The FBI has been building their case for 14 months. Mr. Ashford, they have wiretaps, financial records, and cooperating witnesses from inside your father's dealerships." Brandon's hands began trembling on the table in front of him. His expensive attorney leaned in, whispering frantically into his ear. But Brandon seemed unable to hear anything except Judge Harrington's voice dismantling the foundation of his privileged life piece by piece. "And here's what makes your situation particularly interesting, Mr. Ashford." She held up a printed photograph for the courtroom cameras to capture. "This is the Lamborghini you were driving when you hit Mr. Santos. The pearl white Huracan, custom interior, license plate ASSHR. Brandon nodded weakly, confused about where this was heading, but terrified to find out. "According to insurance records I obtained," Judge Harrington continued, "your father reported this exact vehicle stolen 2 days before you struck Mr. Santos, reported it stolen, filed an insurance claim for its full value of $300,000. She paused. "But you were driving it that night, weren't you?" posting pictures with it on your Instagram account, behind the wheel when it hit an innocent man in a crosswalk. The implications crashed over Brandon like a tidal wave. His father had committed insurance fraud, and Brandon had unwittingly supplied the evidence. Driving the supposedly stolen car around town and documenting it publicly for everyone to see, Judge Harrington pulled out more documents, each one another nail hammered into the coffin of Brandon's arrogance. I have screenshots from your Instagram account, Mr. Ashford. Pictures of you with that Lamborghini, timestamped during the period it was allegedly stolen. Photos of you at nightclubs, restaurants, your penthouse apartment hall with the same vehicle your father claimed thieves had taken. That is federal insurance fraud, Mr. Ashford, and you are an accessory to it. Whether you knew about your father's scheme or not, the law you claim not to fear is about to become very real for you. Brandon's designer suit jacket was off now, discarded carelessly as sweat soaked through his expensive shirt. His perfectly styled hair had become disheveled from his trembling hands running through it over and over. The Rolex he had checked so casually earlier now seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds on his wrist. A symbol of wealth that was about to be seized by federal authorities. Judge Harrington still wasn't done dismantling him. Those previous charges that mysteriously disappeared. Mr. Ashford, the assault, the DUI, the drug possession. Her voice cut sharply through the room. I spent last night speaking with the families your father paid off to keep quiet. 6 different families who are now prepared to come forward and testify about the witness intimidation, the illegal settlement agreements, and the threats they received if they didn't accept the money and remain silent. She let the words settle before continuing. Your father's lawyers didn't make those problems vanish through legal expertise, Mr. Ashford. They erased them through criminal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. All federal crimes. All crimes that carry serious prison time. And all crimes from which you directly benefited. Brandon was openly crying now, tears streaming down his face and dripping onto his custom suit. The arrogant teenager who had strutted into the courtroom moments earlier was gone, replaced by a terrified boy finally understanding that consequences were real and coming for him with the full force of federal law enforcement. Your Honor, please. Brandon choked out between sobs. I didn't know about any of this. I thought my dad's lawyers were good at their jobs. I didn't know they were breaking the law. Judge Harrington's expression showed not a trace of sympathy. Ignorance isn't a defense. Mr. Ashford, you sat in my courtroom and bragged about not fearing the law. You mocked the justice system. You showed zero remorse for destroying Mr. Santos's life. You believed your money made you untouchable. She leaned forward. Let me tell you what you should actually fear. She began listing consequences with the efficiency of someone who had seen justice delayed but never denied. Federal prosecutors will be contacting you within 48 hours regarding the insurance fraud. Your father's assets, including your trust fund and allowance, are likely already frozen pending investigation. The hit-and-run charges against you cannot be dismissed in my courtroom through settlements or legal maneuvering. You will face the full penalty, which includes a suspended license, substantial fines, and community service. And Mr. Santos will receive every cent of compensation he deserves for the injuries you caused and the suffering inflicted upon his family. Brandon hunched over the defendant's table, sobbing uncontrollably, his entire body trembling under the weight of genuine fear for the first time in his privileged life. His friends had slipped out of the courtroom during Judge Harrington's revelations, abandoning him the moment he stopped being entertaining. His expensive attorney was quietly packing up his briefcase, likely already planning to withdraw from the case before federal indictments arrived. Judge Harrington delivered her final judgment with the satisfaction of someone restoring balance to a universe that had Leaned toward injustice for far too long, Mr. Ashford. You are ordered to pay Miguel Santos $250,000 in damages for injuries, pain, suffering, and emotional distress. You will also cover all medical expenses, past and future, plus court costs and legal fees. The total comes to $487,000. She continued without hesitation. Your license is suspended for 5 years. You will complete 500 hours of community service at the County Hospital Trauma Center, where you will witness firsthand the consequences of reckless driving. And you will write a personal letter of apology to Mr. Santos and his family, to be read aloud in this courtroom next month. The gavel came down with finality, and Brandon Ashford III was escorted from the room, not swaggering, but stumbling like someone who had just discovered the ground beneath. His feet had never been as solid as he believed. Miguel Santos, tears of relief streaming down his weathered face, embraced his daughter as the courtroom erupted in applause. Justice had finally caught up with a boy who thought he could outrun it forever. Within hours, the clip went viral, gathering 45 million views in the first week alone. Brandon's statement about not fearing the law quickly became a cautionary tale shared across every social media platform. The next morning, the FBI raided Ashford Luxury Motors, arresting Brandon's father and seizing records that would lead to a massive federal prosecution. Stripped of his allowance, his cars, and his arrogance, Brandon moved into a modest apartment and worked his first real job for minimum wage, finally learning what consequences felt like for people who couldn't buy their way out of them. Judge Harrington had taught him the hardest lesson of his life. The law doesn't care about your bank account, your last name, or your confidence. It cares about the truth. And truth always wins in the end.